All right, well, welcome to our first class on the letter of the Apostle Paul to the Roman congregation. And I've entitled this study, The Obedience of Faith, because Paul mentions this in the opening of his greeting to the Roman congregation. And we're going to do our best to explore the meaning of that phrase during our study, which is going to take quite a few weeks as I think about it, because we're going to do it a little differently than we normally do. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, I always need assistance with the reading and the reading the notes and scriptures. That helps me because you guys know my situation. So I'm going to ask someone. Let's start with my girlfriend, Teresa.
Have a girlfriend.
Right. And she was open to the beginning and the course description. And read that for us.
Course description. Since the publication in the summer of 2002 of the UMJC's definition of Messianic Judaism, a firestorm of controversy has arisen, most especially in the three critical areas of soteriology, ecclesiology, and messiahology. In broad terms, soteriology addresses the question of how one is saved. But as we will see in this study, salvation is a much broader, much more encompassing matter than just the way individuals are saved. Ecclesiology addresses the nature of the people of God, a matter that the Roman community seems somewhat confused about, but one which must be understood if one is to fully understand soteriology. Last, but certainly not least, is messiahology, the very nature of our Messiah. Who is he in his fullness is what we need to understand, and without which neither the people of God nor their salvation can be achieved. So we will be addressing all of these issues in our study of the letter to the Romans.
Right. So it was those early days, and Rabbi Carl, who we're honored to have among our people at this study. Rabbi Carl, can you just say hi?
Hi.
Hi,
It is
Rabbi.
wonderful to be
I
here.
want to acknowledge him right away because he is one of my mentors and from whom I have learned so very much, and who I expect to learn a lot more from. And I see Rabbi Paul here too. Ay, I'm in trouble. I'm in a world of hurt.
Hi, Rabbi Paul.
So glad to have you here, Rabbi Paul. And so this ought to make for a really interesting discussion. But both of these men will know about all the controversy that surrounded our Messianic Jewish theology in that period of time. It's what prompted my interest in the Apostle Paul. And I read and studied the Apostle all these many years since then in my meager effort to understand what he has to say. Now, listen, there are more books written about the Apostle Paul than perhaps any other religious figure other than Yeshua himself. So who am I to tell you what the letter to the Romans means? I don't know. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn together, I hope. You'll read my opinions, hear what I have to say, but I'm as interested in what you have to say as I am in what I have already said. So with that in mind, let's just uh, begin, if you will, on your notes on page 2. And maybe I can have Gail, Gail,
As long as I know who I am.
do some reading for us here, starting with the introduction.
Do you want me to read a couple of those or?
Just read that introduction
Okay.
first.
Romans tries to clarify for Gentile followers of Messiah their relationship to the law, Jews, and Judaism, and the current place of both Jews and Gentiles in God's plan through Messiah Yeshua.
Now that's a quote from a book called Rereading of Romans by Stanley Stowers. I've given you guys a bibliography here. I don't expect you to read all these books. Some of them are expensive. Some of them are not that easy to read. But if you're up to it, I know my 2 rabbi friends have probably read most of them, if they haven't read them all, and are very familiar with the materials in each one of those. But what I'm aiming at here in this first class is to determine the audience of Paul's letter to the Romans. Paul had a number of different motivations in writing the letter. There's not one single motivation, I don't think. But certainly one is to clarify for these Gentile followers of Yeshua their relationship to the Jewish people and their faith through the years. In other words, he's very much interested in their attitudes towards the Jewish people, not only in their midst, but the Jewish people in general. So let's talk a little bit about the founding of the Roman Jewish community. Now, this next section is a summary from a book by Richard Longenecker on an introduction to Romans, supplemented by some work from the early church fathers. So first thing we want to try to do is, I am recording.
Thank you.
So let's read through some of this and get an idea about the Jewish community in Rome during the period of time in which this letter was written. So again, if I could call on Teresa to do some reading for me.
Sure.
Start with the founding of the Roman Jewish community.
Okay. To understand Paul's letter, it is essential to understand to whom the letter was written. So here is a brief summary of the makeup and the nature of the community in Rome at the time of Paul's letter. The Jewish community of Rome. Information on the foundations of the Yeshua community in Rome is scanty. Very few sources can be found which provide this information. The first mention of Jewish contact with Rome is found in the book of 1 Maccabees, chapter 8. Judah Maccabee sent emissaries to inquire about an alliance with the then Roman Republic. Soon, the first Jews to live in Rome arrived circa 136 BCE. By the 1st century CE, there were approximately 50,000 Jews living in Rome. A study of Jewish funerary inscriptions in Rome indicates that there were up to as many as 13 synagogues in Rome. These synagogues, although they had similar ruling structures within each, there was no central governing body of the whole community. Each, it would seem, acted independently of the others. Their main affiliation seems to have been with the temple rulers located in Jerusalem.
All right, let me clarify this. So unlike some other cities, like Antioch or Alexandria in Damascus, where the Jewish community was much more organized as a single unit and had elders, if you will, that were influential in the community. In Rome, the synagogues seemed to act independently of one another without having a chief rabbi, if you will. So they seem to have had a much more a deeper connection with the Jerusalem ruling class directly. But each one of these synagogues acted independently. Now, that's important, I think, because of later developments when the Yeshua message finally did come to Rome. You can continue the relationship between the Jews.
Okay, the relationship between the Jews and Romans was at times good, and at other times not very good for the Jews. For instance, in his article, Jewish Community and Donfried, ed.
Yeah, it's an article
Okay.
that Morgan is referring to.
Romans Debate, 1977, quoted by Longenecker, Wolfgang Weifel writes, one has to keep in mind that the general perception of the Jewish community in Rome was surrounded by misconceptions from the very beginning of its history. The Romans mistook them for followers of the Hellenistic Oriental Sabbazio cult for one of two good reasons. They misunderstood the Jewish word for God, Sabaoth. The Greek form,
Almighty.
The Greek form of Sabaoth, and they might have made the same mistake with the word Sabbath, the most conspicuous custom of Judaism.
Right.
It seemed that the best explanation of the formation of the Yeshua community in Rome can be understood in the context of the Shavuot after the resurrection of Yeshua, when the disciples, especially Peter, first preached their gospel to the crowds that were in Jerusalem for the holiday. It says this in Acts 2, 9 through 11. Parthians, and Medes, and Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, and Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia, and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the districts of Libya around Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them in our own synagogue, in our own tongues, speaking of the mighty deeds of God.
All right, hold on.
The big sentence.
So, yeah.
Or
excuse me,
paragraph.
go ahead.
That is,
That's a big sentence or paragraph.
Yeah,
I don't understand half of them. I know there are various groups of human beings. I know there are various areas of the world in that area of Mediterranean, but it boggles my mind.
they were all
So-
there for the celebration.
they're there, right. So it was the holiday of Shavuot, which is one of the 3 pilgrim festivals of Israel. when all Jewish males are required to come up to Jerusalem to make an offering.
Hmm.
All right?
Yeah.
So Jews from all over the Roman Empire would have come. Now, interestingly enough, what we discover there is that some of these people, at least, are not Jews by birth. They're, as it says, Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, and so on. What I was most particularly interested in is that he says, and visitors from Rome.
Hmm.
So there are also visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, who came to this festival and were able to hear the message of the gospel from Peter and the other apostles of Yeshua. Something else to note is that how the Jewish people stood out socially from the rest of the Roman community. All right. Now, interestingly enough, the Romans were really pretty liberal in their allowing different groups to practice their religion as long as they gave obeisance to the emperor, followed Roman custom in regard to certain sacrifices and all this sort of thing. However, the Jewish people were exempt from all of this. They were exempt from all of this because of a deal they made with Julius Caesar when he was in his conflict with what's his name? What's the name of that other guy? I'm having a senior moment. Pompey.
Oh, okay.
When Pompey and Julius Caesar were vying for the control of the empire. So Julius Caesar made a deal with the Jews to side with him. As a result, he exempted them from the need to do emperor worship, make sacrifices, and all these sorts of things. Now, this made the Jews stand out. And you will see how later on, when we get into the obedience of faith, how this affects the meaning of that terminology to the Roman Yeshua community. I'll hopefully be able to tie that together for you a little bit later on. All right. So here we are determining who the people of the Roman Yeshua community might be and how those communities formed. So let's continue to read. So let me see if I can get somebody here to read. Maybe Anne, do you have the notes? Anne, why don't you read first? But first you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi. Okay,
We'll
let's
start with church tradition on page 3.
certainly. Church tradition has it that the church in Rome was founded by Peter. Eusebius has it that Peter founded the community in the year 42 CE. The Liberian catalog, Latin Catalogus Liberianus, is a list of the bishops of Rome from Peter to Liberius, who died in 366. For each bishop, the list lengths up.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It lists
lengths of his episcopate.
the episcopate, how long he was a bishop.
Lists how long he was a bishop. The corresponding consular dates and the names of the reigning emperors. It also has Peter as the founder and, of course, the first bishop of Rome. However, there's no empirical evidence that Peter ever went to Rome, let alone founded the church there. No doubt if he had, Paul would have mentioned it later in his letter, or at least greeted him along with the other leaders of the community he greeted in chapter 16 of the letter.
All right.
That was
So,
refreshing.
what's your reaction to that?
I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other opinions maybe that
I think he
uh,
did.
maybe Peter did found it because early church tradition is very strong in this matter, and
Listen to Roman
you
Catholic
go
Church.
to the Roman Catholic, if you go to the
Yeah.
Vatican today, they'll swear to you,
Yes.
if they wanted to, they can dig up Peter's bones.
Ah,
So,
yeah, whatever.
but it doesn't, I don't think there's anything real. The only thing of Peter that's there is a big statue of him in the middle of St. Peter's Square, in my opinion. I've been there twice.
Yeah.
So-
Weren't those statues actually like?
I'm sorry, say
Weren't
again?
those statues actually like Roman, gods, like
No,
they weren't like Zeus?
no.
Okay.
The one, on one side is Peter, a picture, a statue of Peter. On the other side is a statue of Paul.
And I know they had a falling out many times.
Well,
That's what I heard.
well, the two of them, that's a different matter
enough.
altogether.
I would like to suggest that there are many different opinions going on here, and I don't want to hear contemptuous comments from anybody.
Okay, I agree with that.
What did he say?
Do you have a different opinion about this matter? Mr. Levy? No? Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's continue.
Rabbi Tony,
Yeah,
just one thought, and this is in post-missionary Messianic Judaism.
Mhm.
Mark Kinzer indicates that there was a catacomb where they found in the catacomb they found a rendering, a drawing of with two sides with the ecclesia of the circumcised and the ecclesia of the uncircumcised with renderings of Paul and Peter. So I think that there are some indications, even though I know church history, especially Eusebius, is always very questionable. There
Yeah.
are some indications that that Peter at least was in Rome, whether he was the founder of the.
Did he indicate anything about the provenance of those drawings? In other words, how late were they? In antiquity, were they dated to?
I think again, this is so long ago that I read it, but I think he did place the provenance somewhere within first century.
Oh,
You know,
really?
when,
That's significant.
but I don't remember well enough to tell you how exactly what the provenance was. Again, this could be more lore, and a lot of these things, and I think this is what Sam's getting, a lot of this can be based upon how sympathetic we are to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, understood. Right. But I think it's curious, don't you think, that Paul does not mention Peter at all in this letter. If he was greeting all the other leaders of the community, why wouldn't he have greeted Peter, or at least mentioned him, since according to Eusebius,
I think that's true.
he founded the church in 42 CE, and the letter is written maybe according to tradition around 55 CE. So one would think that if Peter were involved with the community, Paul would have mentioned it. That's just my conclusion.
Maybe
Okay.
he was dead.
I'm sorry,
Maybe he was dead.
who?
Peter.
Peter? By 55, you might be right, I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that, but I don't think so. I mean, my first thought is that he wasn't dead. I think he died after Paul. That's my thought. Okay, well, let's continue. So we get to this, so we can get to the text. If you'll continue, I'm sorry, where's she? And continue to read. It says, it appears.
It appears, certainly, thank you. It appears that the synagogues of Rome had in them Jews, of course, but also Gentiles who found the Jewish religion attractive. They participated at various levels of Jewish observance, from the merely curious to the God-fearers to full converts. Rather than the community of Yeshua being founded by Peter or Paul, more likely some of those people who were mentioned in the book of Acts, Jews and proselytes, took the message of the gospel back to Rome with them. Consider this quote found in Longenecker. On the other hand, Ambrosiaster, the mysterious commenter on the Pauline letters who lived in Rome during the 4th century and whose literal rather than straightforward commentary on Romans evidences a special interest in Jewish matters, wrote about AD 375 in the prologue to his commentary on Romans concerning Jews and Christians at Rome. It is evident that there were Jews living in Rome in the time of the apostles. Some of these Jews who had come to believe in Christ passed on to the Romans the message that they should acknowledge Christ and keep the law. One ought not to be angry with the Romans, but praise their faith, because they came to embrace faith in Christ without seeing any sign of miracles and without any of the apostles, though according to the Jewish rite.
Right.
According to the Jewish rite.
Yeah. So at least Ambrosiaster thought that the community was formed by those people who had been to Jerusalem during the holiday, and that when they brought back their faith, remember there were Jews and proselytes involved, when they brought back their faith, they might have interacted with one or more of the 13 synagogues that were already established in the city of Rome. So thus their practice, their orthopraxy, would have reflected a more Jewish style. You know, they were more Jewish customary style, more Jewish forms of prayer and service and so on. All right. So let's continue with this, and maybe I can get somebody else to read. How about you, Brandon? Can I call on you? Do you have the notes? Unmute yourself there.
Yes.
Yes.
Brandon.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
All right.
In AD 49.
In AD 49, the Emperor Claudius expelled all the Jews from Rome. So the early Yeshua congregations, originally made up of Jews and Gentiles, and being much more Jewish in their faith and practice, and it would seem being led by Jews, were now completely Gentile in makeup. The edict was repealed in AD 54 when Claudius died. This allowed for the return of at least some of the Jews who had been expelled. This also meant that Jewish believers in Yeshua would have returned and we can assume rejoined their fellowships, but would appear under somewhat different circumstances. Now, the Gentiles would have been in leadership in these groups, and what they believed and how they practiced their faith may have changed in the intervening years.
Continue.
Longenecker sums up, pardon?
Continue.
Longenecker sums up the question all these things pose this way. Quote, the crucial questions for an understanding of Paul's letter to the Christians at Rome, however, have to do with the identity, character, circumstances, and concerns of the apostles' addressees. Were they ethnically Jews or Gentiles? Or were the Christian congregations at Rome comprised of both? And if so, in what proportions? How did they think theologically? What were their civic and social circumstances in the city? And what concerns did they have about themselves as believers in Jesus and about their relationship to Paul, quote, the apostle of the Gentiles, unquote, and his mission to Gentiles in the Roman Empire?
Right. Now,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, hold on. So I included this because, again, remember that Jews had been exempt from having to perform acts of worship toward the emperor and other kinds of sacrifices. And believe me, you think the Jewish people have a lot of holidays. The Romans had a lot of holidays and plenty of days where you had to make sacrifices and all kinds of other things. Plus, there were other issues about food and purity and other matters of concern. Now, notice how Longenecker points out the issue of their social circumstances in the city. You can imagine that being a Gentile, a Roman citizen, for instance, who now becomes a believer in Yeshua, yet has to live socially among his other Roman brethren, if you will. He's going to look like an oddball standing out, don't you think? What would it be like? I mean, listen, we've all experienced this. I'm going to be very frank here. We've all experienced this even in the modern Messianic Jewish movement, where we see Gentiles who decide they're Jewish. So they're walking around with payas, tzitzit hanging from their belt loops, and all kinds of other things. And think of how strange that may seem. So imagine what it would have been like for Romans in their day. And there's an additional problem, and that is, where does your fealty lie? Where does your allegiance lie? Is Caesar still your king? I mean, it's one thing for a Jew to be able to say, listen, you know, I have a card here that says I'm exempt. What if you're not a Jew by birth? That makes for a problem. So it may be, I'm just suggesting that when the Jews were expelled from Rome and the non-Jews took over these Yeshua communities, that certain practices lapsed. And the character of those communities may have changed. This, I believe, is maybe another reason why Paul is wanting to write this letter. he wants to help them to come to an understanding of who they should be as believers now in the God of Israel and in his Messiah. Okay, so, okay, again, our approach to this class will be different than in other classes that I've given. In this class, we will do a close reading of the letter, and from that reading, attempt to understand Paul's purpose in writing the letter to the Roman community. To accomplish this, we'll be doing a verse-by-verse study in an effort to unpack all that we can of the apostles' magnum opus. I somehow got dyslexic. I wrote this down. Now, I'm a caveat before we begin. As I said to Rabbi Carl earlier, it took Martin Luther 5 years to teach through the book of Romans. So I humbly begin this study with a great deal of humility, and I know that I'll probably get some things wrong, but we're going to do our best to together. And if some of these astute scholars that are here participate as well, and I welcome their participation, maybe we can come to a better understanding of what this letter is all about. So with that, let's begin. So, what's your name?
Roberto, senor.
Roberto.
Yes, sir.
Just read the first verse 1 and the comments there.
Fair enough. So it says chapter 1, verse 1:1. Paul, a bondservant of Messiah Yeshua, called as an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God. The comment is a bondservant. I'm going to mispronounce it. Doulos, thank you. A willing slave. Paul indicates his status and calling. He considers himself a slave totally bound to God and Messiah. And this he does willingly, considering himself unworthy of this great calling. He recognizes the great grace he has been shown. It manifests itself in his tremendous zeal for his mission. Paul also indicates the authority of his message. He has been set apart, sanctified, especially by God for the sacred task. His authority is therefore granted not by human agency, but by God himself. He has been called a prophet to announce the good news to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
Galatians.
So,
1.
yeah. So, Paul, one of the things we need to recognize about Paul is that Paul did not found this community. This we know of a certainty, that Paul was not the founder of this community. Unlike, for instance, the Galatians, the community he did found. So he is introducing himself to these people, or many of them anyway. And you're going to notice that even though he's forceful in his comments, he's also really polite in the way in which he addresses these people, because he does not know them. But he does want them to understand that he is the called apostle to the nations, and that as a result of that calling, he has a certain amount of authority, even with them. Even with them. And that they have a responsibility to take what he says seriously. Okay? So, if someone would turn to Galatians chapter 1, verse 15 and 16, Teresa, since I know you have my version,
Okay,
if you wouldn't mind reading that,
1:15 and 16.
yeah.
But when God, who had set me apart, even from my mother's womb, and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood.
All right. So Paul saw himself called
Like that.
by God to be a prophet. He's quoting there from Jeremiah. I believe, I think Jeremiah and somewhere else as well. He's referring to the prophets as the source of his own authority. So Paul is, though he calls himself a bondservant, is an apostle. An apostle with the same quote unquote spiritual ranking, if you will, as Peter or John or Andrew or Jacob or any of the others who were called by Yeshua himself. We can go back to chapter 9 of Book of Acts and see the entire episode in which Yeshua calls him and tells him specifically that he is called to be an apostle to the nations, that he would bring the message of the good news before the Jews, before kings, and before the nations. So he has, he wants to introduce right off the bat his own authority to declaim on certain matters which are prevalent there in the Roman congregation. Okay? So, verse 2. Marsha, why don't you read verse 2 then?
This message he has been commissioned to deliver is an ancient one,
No,
right?
read the verse.
Read the
Read
script,
the verse first.
Oh,
the verse. It's up
It's
above.
right
the-
there. It's
comment.
small print.
Oh, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scripture. Continue.
Yeah.
This message he has been commissioned to deliver is an ancient one. All the holy prophets, of whom he is the latest, and in his mind the least, prophesies of the prophet promise, which now he preaches as fulfilled in Yeshua the Messiah.
Yeah. You know, this is a very important phrase, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. I think it's, hold on a second here. Try to get to my notes. I think it was Richard Hayes in his book, Echoes of Scripture in the Letters of Paul, who says that Paul quotes the Hebrew Scriptures 40 or 50 times in the book of Romans alone. So he is clearly establishing his gospel anchored in the Hebrew Scriptures, not in some brand new thing that Yeshua made up, quote unquote. All right. So let's continue to read this. How about you?
Me, Karen, me?
Yeah,
up here.
Oh, that's 1 through,
concerning,
okay, concerning his son, who was born of a descendant of David according to the flesh. Paul begins his definition of the good news by declaring that good news is about the Son of God, who was born as the promise indicated, a descendant of David in the flesh. This indicates that the good news of his Messiah is
Inextricably.
that's right, tied to the Jewish people. It should not be lost on us that this promise finds its origin in God's promise to Abraham, Genesis 12, 1-3. It is the first indication of the letter of the fact that the good news about Yeshua is the fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham, not a new agreement in its own right, based on standard construction of New Covenant literature. The New Covenant,
Don't worry about that.
okay, is an utterly new agreement between God and mankind, a complete obliteration of all things previous. But this is not what Paul is indicating here. Instead, he appeals to the ancient prophets and promises God made to the patriarchs and confirmed with the Jewish people throughout their long history. So then, for Paul, the good news is that God is fulfilling his ancient promises in and through this one, his son.
Yes. What does this mean? What do you think this means? What is the import of this, of him saying concerning his son who is born of a descendant of David according to the flesh? Anybody have any ideas about why Paul would say this specifically?
Because I think already was arguments about nature of the Yeshua as because it's a Gentile community, and some people believes he's an angel from, or he's just suffer not like a man, but he don't have like a man's nature, and that like one of the gods of the Romans.
Yeah.
It's very close to their traditional beliefs.
Yeah.
So he's trying to explain that Yeshua is the real man and real body, come from real family, which is he is descendants of the David. I mean, as an inheritance of the throne of the David, as a Messiah.
Can you guys hear
King of
this?
Jews.
I just want to make sure.
So to predict any questions about his nature, he imposed this in his speech introduction,
Right.
so people don't argue about it.
Okay.
It's
I think you're right. That Paul is establishing Yeshua's Jewish lineage. And this is very important for the people of Rome to understand that Yeshua is a Jew of Jews.
correct.
That's what you exactly wrote in here, that the good news of this Messiah is inextricably tied to the Jewish people.
Yeah. He is making that connection for the Roman community, at least the Gentile portion of the Roman community, that their lives, their faith in Yeshua is tied inextricably to the Jewish people, not just to Yeshua alone.
Mhm.
See,
Later
to
we'll
me,
see.
this is a mistake that ultimately is made throughout in early Christendom. That once Yeshua came, the Jewish people are
Right, yeah.
irrelevant.
Mhm.
But Paul is saying that's not so. He's establishing immediately the connection between Yeshua and his people and the people and Yeshua, and how they are tied together and cannot be separated.
Right.
Or should not be separated. Let's put it that way.
That's why I dislike Christians that do just separate that, because that's my understanding as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Incorrect teaching.
Dispensationalism, it's called.
Let's see. I want to get somebody out here. Henry, here's my man, Henry.
Hey, Henry.
Hey, Henry, how about reading the next verse 4 for us?
Hold on a sec here. I gotta get it on my phone. I'm not savvy. Let me see here. I'm under pressure.
Sorry, if you.
Pressure to find it. Yeah, have somebody else read now. That's okay.
Maybe somebody else can do that. Right. Hey, Rabbi Paul, how about you? You have the notes there? You're muted.
All this technology.
Okay, so I'm
Here we go.
sorry, my grandson was speaking to me, so I apologize. What was, do you want me to read?
Yeah, verse 4 and the note.
Oh, sure. Who was declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead, according to the Spirit of holiness, Messiah Yeshua our Lord. The power of this good news finds its voice and authority in the fact that Yeshua was raised from the dead. This is the one utterly undisputable reality which for Paul matters most. For in this act, God has demonstrated his faithfulness, power, authority, and victory over all the dark forces of the world. And in this act was ushered in the Olam Haba. The sign of this age is the Spirit of God acting in the resurrection of Messiah and present in the people of God.
Yeah. Right. See, I'm convinced that what Paul is, I read so many things about what happened to Paul on the road to Damascus. He converted to a new religion. No, what happened to Paul was not that his religion was changed. It was his conception of time that was altered. He now understood that the age to come had dawned. Why? Because Yeshua was raised from the dead. Because the resurrection had begun, we now lived in the age of the Olam Haba, the world to come. And that even though we still see this world in evidence, nevertheless, the world to come has dawned. The kingdom of God has begun. And that changes a lot of things, particularly in regard to people from the nations. Because what was the prevailing thought, do you think, about the Gentiles among the Jewish people at this point in time? I wonder if anybody has any ideas that they'd like to share about what Jewish thought about Gentiles during this time might have been. Henry?
I've got a thought, Rabbi. Yeah, I would say that for 2,000 years, it was a Jewish concern only. And even Peter, I think, when he was not invited, but went to Cornelius's house after that, after those animals came down and all that, even he was somewhat surprised, that you say, he thought it was this is a Jewish concern only, but the Holy Spirit was given to Cornelius, and that convinced him at that time. Maybe he still had thoughts that maybe that was wrong, but I think there was a turning point there. So for 2,000 years, it was a Jewish concern. Now, all of a sudden, there was a transition period, and it was difficult, I think, for the Jews to accept that.
Interesting. Good. Any other thoughts regarding this very, very critical matter, really?
What Henry just said, what were the Jews concerned about?
The eternal destiny of Gentiles. To sum it up.
Well, basically, they were polytheistic primarily. Jewish was not the only monotheistic religion at the time. Presumably, there was some in Egypt at one point and some other places maybe as well. But I think that was one of the big ones, is the monotheism and the fact that there's a Messiah which would reign over this world, and the Gentiles, or I should say, the others, which were polytheistic, didn't believe in that.
So what would happen to a Gentile upon their death?
Hades,
Hades?
Valhalla.
Oh, you don't think the Jews believe that, do you?
I don't know. I'm just talking from a Gentile perspective.
No. I'm thinking about what Jews thought
Oh, I don't.
of Gentiles, of how Gentiles fit into the Olam Haba.
I mean,
Do you think they thought they were condemned?
No,
Gentiles were condemned?
I think it's what Chabad teachings. It's very appropriate to remind, because they think the Olam Haba is when the Jewish people will rule over every nations, and every nation will serve them. It's actually found in Isaiah. You can see in the prophets. So every nation will serve Israel, to support Israel and carry whatever.
Yeah, but some of them will be priests and kings alongside, you know? Isaiah 65,
right, but
66.
You see, it's the same problem. When we read the scriptures, we find in the scripture what favor to our ideas many times.
Sure.
So in why we see the Peter, or like brother was mentioned, when he come to the before he come to Cornelius' house, so Peter was possessed with those prejudices against Gentiles.
Yeah.
And to be able to destroy this wall of hostility between Jewish people and Gentiles, so that God intervening supernaturally to explain Peter. So right now I open the door for Gentiles also. Later we see in the Ephesians, he also, Apostle Paul also described them. So now you are partakers of the commonwealth of Israel and became one nation with them, one people. And this mystery, I call it mystery, was hidden from Jewish people mainly, and only revealed few of them. And Paul, one of them, whom God revealed his mystery of the building project, what God tried to expose. Yes, it wasn't the prophets, but they didn't observe the prophets like we are today. I think it's why this wall of hostility was in the Jewish people. Also, dangerous of the incoming of the Gentiles. They say, so how can we then go to the temple? Because if we communicate with Gentiles or cross the because law of the threshold, if you come to the house of the Gentiles or pagans, how you call it, this
unclean.
And when you're unclean, you tamei, you can't go to the temple. And the temple was exist yet, right? So they separate themselves from the Gentiles. Even in a temple, you see the wall, separation of wall, whereas the Gentiles cannot cross over.
And yet they had a place for Gentiles to come to the temple.
Right.
Right there at the court of the Gentiles.
They cannot enter.
They couldn't go any further. We will explore this idea a little more next week. But let me leave you with this thought. That at least for some Jews, the notion of righteous Gentiles did exist. That if they were to follow the Noahide commandments, that they had some place with God, some standing with God. We will get more into this next week.
Okay,
Okay.
I thought this Noahide idea is a come from Middle Ages. It's not
Well,
biblical
I'm
perspective.
probably being a bit anachronistic here,
Mhm.
but nevertheless, you know what I mean when I say that.
It's
right?
idea some rabbi, I don't remember his name, but he's bring this idea about
Yeah.
Noahide's law and everything is
Mhm.
about Gentiles.
Yeah,
It's not exist in the Bible at all,
correct.
in my opinion.
Okay. Well, let's continue, all right? All right, where are we? Verse 5.
Yes, sir.
So let me see, Henry, are you ready yet? Are you ready yet? Did you get it? You didn't do it, did you?
He's mute, he's muted.
Okay,
I'm
Judy,
sorry. Yeah.
how about Judy? Would you read for us?
I'm a little hesitant too because I'm with dogs who are barking and
Oh.
it would be disruptive. So
All
I'm
right.
gonna hold off for a little bit. I'm sorry.
How about Rabbi Carl? How about you?
I actually don't have the same can you hear me?
Don't you have my notes?
Yeah, but I have a technical problem here. I'm actually trying to
Okay,
look up
another
something else that's relevant to our discussion. I
All right,
always have a technical.
Candida. Let's get Candida involved.
I don't read it out loud.
Okay, you don't read.
Yes.
All right, who would like to read? Go ahead.
Yes.
1, 5, and 6 down the bottom.
Through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles for his name's sake, among whom you also are the called of Messiah Yeshua. Paul speaks directly to his mission, to bring this message that in Yeshua the Messiah, God has made a way for the nations to enter into covenant relationship with the God of Israel and become members of the people of God in a newly constituted covenant community.
Right. Okay, so here is the heart of the gospel to the nations. He has received this apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith of the Gentiles. Notice it says Gentiles. Even though there are Jews who are involved in this. So he has, why, what is this all about? That in Messiah Yeshua, as Paul states in, for instance, in Ephesians, that God has made the two groups into one new humanity and reconciled them through the blood of Messiah Yeshua. And that together, now they constitute what we will call the people of God. Jews as Jews, Gentiles as Gentiles, but one people of God under Messiah Yeshua. All right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, why does he have to tell them that? Wouldn't that have been part of the message that they would have received from the beginning?
No.
Particularly if Peter had founded the community. Haha.
I'd be great.
Well, I think the fact that we already talked about it in those readings is that the Jews were reintroduced back to their original synagogues through the Messiah, in the fact that they were excommunicated from Rome for a period of time.
Yeah.
So they wanted to remind, as you had mentioned yourself, that maybe some of the practices had either been put aside or changed completely.
Well,
So-
their understanding
Or their
of the
understanding.
people of
Right.
God, who constituted the people of God, might have been distorted. And part of one of the reason that Paul is writing the letter is to help them to understand more fully who constitutes the people of God. Yeah. Any comments?
I think identity crisis has always existed.
Oh, it
Yeah.
still exists.
Yeah, it still exists today. So always, actually, your identification leads to action according to your call, for example. Like in Paul, by his own example, he shows his own example on his life. Same thing like Yeshua shows the example what to be God's, and he remind them, this people, community who come from any nations or from Rome, so they are also gods. So they will understand their identity as a God's people and with certain consequences of it. So they understand whom they call and why they call and for what they call, what they're supposed to be.
Right. So while you're at it, can you read verse 7 there? And a comment?
To all who are beloved of God in Rome, call us saints, grace to you and peace from God, our Father, and the Lord Messiah Yeshua. In this verse, we find the first indication of the theme of the letter. The new community of God made possible through Yeshua the Messiah. Paul's message therefore concerned the makeup and culture of this newly constituted community.
You see, which is what you were just saying, that their identity is going to produce within an action, that they are now part of a new community in which they can no longer act as pagans, can they?
Called as saints.
Called as saints, right.
And the saints has been separated from and now belongs to somebody, to God.
Yeah, to God in this case. All right. So let's continue. We're making good progress here. Let me start. How do you read? Verse 8.
Yeah. First, I thank my God through Messiah Yeshua for you all, because your faith is being proclaimed throughout the whole world. Paul speaks of the faithfulness, don't ask me, of the Roman community. Again, the controversial translation of, how do you say that? Pistis, is that at the center of this issue, rather than Yeshua being the object of faith, it is Yeshua's faithfulness in completing the mission God sent him on that now allows for the faithfulness of these Romans. This faith/faithfulness must be something that can be seen by those around this community. Paul has heard of it, even in distant lands. It is therefore not an inner sense of conviction, some assent to a particular idea. It is rather a set of actions which demonstrate in a definitive way the Romans' loyalty to the God of Israel, in whom they have placed their trust.
Okay. I want to be really clear about this. Now again, trying to remember the author's name. Shoot, was this might have been Hayes too. I don't have him on my
Yeah, you have them on your bibliography.
bibliography. No.
That goes with scripture
not the
and that's
book,
the law.
no, I'm not the book, I'm not that book,
Oh, okay.
but he did a whole book on this phrase, pistis aesus,
Oh.
which is generally translated as faith in Jesus, as faith in Jesus.
It would be Doug Haring.
No, it wasn't Doug Haring. It definitely wasn't Doug Haring. I
Yes,
thought
he
it,
did an
I
awful
thought
lot
it was
on that.
Hayes. I thought it was Hayes.
No, Doug Haring did an awful lot on that.
Yeah, maybe he did. But here's the deal. The idea is this, that it is the faithfulness of Yeshua that we place our trust in, not in Yeshua as a mere object of faith. It's because he was faithful to fulfill the task given to him by his Father. To die on the cross, be raised from the dead, to declare victory over evil, the forces of this world. All right? And by doing so, to unite humanity under a new banner, if you will. All right? So we're going to get more into this idea as this letter goes along. But right from the start, we need to understand this as God's faithfulness. And we'll get into it a little bit further down the line. So not only that, but we see that just as Yaakov indicated to us before, there's a transference, a transformation in their whole cultural, the attitude, in the way in which they act, which Paul and others have heard about, and for which he commends the Romans, that their faith has traction, you know what I mean? And people see that. I mean, do people see our faith today? You know, or are we just, talking to ourselves? I often wonder.
I want to make sure that I get it right, what you said. You said, we placed our trust in Yeshua's faithfulness, not in.
Not just faith in Yeshua,
It's the faithfulness of Yeshua in doing what he did that allows me to place my trust in him.
Yeah,
Because
well, that's his faithfulness.
By his faithfulness, he demonstrates who he is. You see?
Show us example.
I'm sorry?
You show us example what's to be faithful to God.
Follow God's commands.
Right.
What did Yeshua say?
Every step
If
of the
you
way.
love me, you'll do what I say.
It's part of his
Right.
ministry, not only to sanctify whole nations and people for God, but also to show he called himself, I am the truth, I am the way, and I am alive. And life means lifestyle. It's
That's good.
he produced by his kind. Like every man produce kids for his kind. Also, we call to be sons of God, and he trying to impress this idea into mind of these new believers. Pagans come from different cultures where they don't have this idea at all. They just have bunch of gods whom they want to please by giving something or gifts or sacrifice or anything. But he trying to give them explanation. Now you called by God to be God's sons and daughters. It means place responsibility
Yeah.
to be faithful. And Yeshua is to show the faithfulness himself and show us what that means to be son of God.
But that's why I said we place our trust in his faithfulness.
Yeah,
And that's what you said. And that, but you said, and not in, and I don't remember what the not was, what you said.
no. Yeah, see, the idea is that typically one declares, I believe that Jesus is Lord. But what does that mean? You know,
Another God in
idea-
the pantheon of
the idea
pagans.
being that
Could be.
what Paul is saying is that because of Yeshua's faithfulness, we'll get to it when we get to verses 16 and 17.
Okay,
So
no problem.
let's try and get there.
When we get there.
All right. So
Tony, can I
Teresa,
just-
read. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can I just mention, I didn't have a Greek text in front of me, so I just wanted to clarify it. When we
Yeah.
were talking about Gentiles, we again spoke about it as individual Gentiles, but the word there that he's using is ethnos, which is,
Yeah.
he's basically speaking of nations, the same way we would often understand, and psalmists would understand the word goyim as the nations, not individual people or people who previously, as Peter would refer to them, were previously pagans. He's speaking about nations. And I think that the problem we get into this is that we try to over insert our later soteriology into this. And if we understand this as this is thinking in terms of the communal task of Israel, there is the nation of Israel, and then the task and the purpose, which is Israel's inheritance, to bring the knowledge of the God of Israel to the nations. I think that's essentially what Paul is getting at here. This is not about individuals coming to saving grace, but rather about God reaching out to the nations.
Right. Thank you, Paul.
And just to follow, sorry
Very-
for interrupting. May I just ask a question? I was looking for that also in the Greek text, and I just saw him in verse 8 say peripanton humon, like for all of you, without necessarily expressly saying who he's talking to.
Yeah.
But I think the point is correct, that he's talking, he's addressing Roman pagans as a whole, as a group, rather than individuals.
Yeah. See,
But that
I
raises,
think-
yeah.
Go ahead, Judy. I'm sorry.
Well, it just, I agree that he's doing all that, but I think it seems to me that he's doing something more, which is that he's trying to establish a context that is supremely relational between Yeshua and his people, between Yeshua and the nations, between Yeshua and the Jews, that's sort of grounded in the historical reality of Yeshua. So from the very beginning, he is trying to talk about relationship and establish a relational context. I'm not sure exactly how he does that, but certainly I hear it and I experience it.
Uh-huh.
I've heard the
Yeah.
same thing before.
Rabbi Carl, go ahead.
Following on what Judith said, I think, of course, you were speaking about relationship in all directions.
In all directions, yes.
Right. And so I just wanted to voice one thought, may have been said while I was offline there, and is that our faith is not in an abstraction.
Right.
It's always faith in a person.
Mm-hmm.
Faith in Yeshua, faith in God. It's never faith just in the faithfulness of Yeshua. That already is removing it one step. It's
Mhm.
in Yeshua who is faithful.
Faithful, yeah. Yes, sir. Agreed. I think but one of the problems we're going to have to overcome in the interpretation of this letter is understanding precisely who Paul is addressing at what point. He's not always addressing everybody. Sometimes he's addressing the Jews, sometimes he's addressing the Gentiles as a whole. We have to figure it out. And that's why there are, I don't know, 400,000 volumes written by people on, what Paul had to say. I'm not sure Paul knew who he was talking to half the time. So,
I love him.
but, we're going to do our best. So let me see. Can I get Anne to read for us verse 9 and following?
Certainly. Verse 1:9 through 15. For
Yeah.
God, whom I serve in my spirit in the preaching of the gospel of his Son, is my witness as to how unceasingly I make mention of you, always in my prayers, making requests. If perhaps now, at last by the will of God, I may succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you in order that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, that you may be established. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you while among you, each of us by the other's faith, both yours and mine. And I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that often I have planned to come to you and have been prevented thus far, in order that I might obtain some fruit among you also, even as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. Thus, for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. Shall I continue with the?
Yeah.
Paul expresses his desire to come and visit with the Romans. This is a congregation of people who, for the most part, he does not know. This will become more and more evident as the letter goes on. It is written in very polite fashion, as a visiting dignitary rather than headmaster. Contrast this with his letter to the Galatian community, a group he helped to form. Here he is expressing his desire to share insights with them. Although he does want to establish his credentials as the apostle to the Gentiles with them, he seems to want to do it in an understated way rather than demanding their respect. At least at this stage, he had not entirely revealed his reason for writing the letter, although they will become apparent.
Okay. He says here that he desires to have fruit among them. Why? Because he feels an obligation, that it is his obligation specifically to evangelize the Gentiles. Right? In the letter to the Galatians, you'll recall that he says he went out to visit with Yaakov, Yeshua's brother, who was the leader of the community there, and he met with some of the other leaders, and he describes that he has been given the commission of preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, just as Peter was to the Jews. So he has feels this real obligation, and that he he has a responsibility to preach the good news to the Roman community there. Right. So I just want us to make help us to understand that he feels a real obligation to them to tell them of his gospel and how he sees the Gentile community fitting in to the community of Yeshua believers with Israel, with all of Israel. Yeah,
Well, that's one thing about this paragraph, especially about this part that says, I am under obligation with the Jews and to the barbarians. I'm a former barbarian myself, both to the wise and the foolish. I've also been foolish myself. So I think you're right, talking about that obligation to, that's the other thing too about that I was talking about earlier about the mouthful of all these different parts of the world, is that Rome is the center of the world at that time, I believe.
yeah.
And
that's
so
true.
basically you got everybody from, I don't know, 100 nations or so, from as far east as maybe China to as far north as the Scandinavians to as far south as the Africans, maybe Ethiopia or further south. So he's talking to all the Gentiles in that regard.
Yeah.
And so that's the point that you're making.
Mhm. Right, exactly. All right. So let me get these names. Brandon, would you please read verses 16 and 17 for us?
I like this.
Yes.
Not
Yes. Okay. Verses 16 and 17. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For it is the righteousness of God, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. With these verses, we come to the very heart of Paul's message to the Romans. This is the insight that he feels compelled to share. First, the meaning of the gospel. For Paul, the meaning of the gospel is that God, in faithfulness to his promises to Abraham, as in Messiah Yeshua, and through his faithfulness, acted on our behalf, on behalf of Israel, the nations, and all creation, by reconciling the world to God and establishing the kingdom of God. God's act of faithfulness in Yeshua is that God and he alone initiated the work necessary to allow for ongoing covenantal relationship between himself and the world. This relationship does exist. It does not go into effect upon the act of any individual. Rather, that relationship is in effect apart from any human act. Quote, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Messiah died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous man, though for a good man, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were yet sinners, Messiah died for us. Romans 5:6-8.
Yeah, let me cut in here. To me, this is one of those verses that I don't know how many words has been written on these particular verses, 16 and 17. But I'd like to try to take a few minutes now to break this down as best we can. In particular, the second half, which it says, for in it the righteousness, the gospel is this, for in it the righteousness of God, the righteousness of God. What does that mean, the righteousness of God?
I think it's righteousness according to God's word, according to God's character, according to God's himself, not according to somebody's idea. That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
There's too many ideas about this righteousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you get justified by faith. It's like you're coming to a.
Well, we'll come to justification a little later on in our study.
So
Well, I want to know what we think about the righteousness of God. What does that term mean?
It's hard to figure that out. Because when I think of righteousness, I mean, like our righteousness is like our right standing with God.
Okay. Now, why would God need that for himself?
Exactly.
So it can't mean that. I don't think it can mean that.
No.
I'm sorry? Speak up, please.
I guess his word.
His word. Okay, so you're from my point of view, you're on the right track. What I see as the righteousness of God is the faithfulness of God. This could have been written as God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promise, which he made to Abraham long ago. So in it, the faithfulness, the truthfulness of God is revealed from his faithfulness, if you want to look at it this way, to my trust.
Faith to faith.
You see, from faith to faith. This is how I see it. Now, I could be wrong. I'm willing to be corrected. Rabbi Carl.
Well, I'm not correcting you. I do want to add something though. And then very often am I muted now? Very often righteousness is associated with and sometimes used interchangeably with justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has to be a reference there somehow. It's included somehow in that. Because that whole theme is going to come up again.
In other words, God acting justly.
Right.
And in accordance with his word, would you say?
Condition.
In accordance with what he has promised. Would that be acceptable? Carl?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's surely part of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That again will come up about whether God's actions are faithful to his words or not.
Okay.
That's later on.
We'll talk about that Monday.
Can I come?
So is the question still on the table about what
yes.
the justice of God means?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. By all means.
That is this a question then of the righteousness that a human might have before God was one option, that God's own justice or righteousness or rightness is another option. Mm-hmm. Is there another option of it being the righteousness or the justice that God enacts or provides or declares? Because this could be like a legal judgment, right? God's judgment of justice. Because later on, Paul's going to have an awful lot to say about that regarding how God judges Abraham just.
Yeah.
So that seems like a third thing.
We'll get into that. But here, Paul is declaring that the gospel is that God is true to his word.
Right.
And as a result of that, for the righteousness of God, his truthfulness, his faithfulness is revealed from that faith, the faithfulness of God, to my trusting in his faithfulness, because I can trust that he is God. See, why do we worship Messiah Yeshua? Because he demonstrated that he is the Son of God. All right? As Rabbi Carl pointed out earlier, it's not merely that he just died for somebody, that it's who he is that we put our faith in him. Right? So I can trust because of how he demonstrated who he is, that I can trust him. Otherwise, why can't I trust Zeus? Or, or Mercury, or somebody like that, or, Aphrodite, or somebody like that. What the heck? All right? He demonstrates who he is.
Yeshua and other gods of Rome. And they probably Paul trying to explain them. So the Yeshua revealed the true faithfulness to Father, and through him we received the righteousness of God.
Yeah.
Getting late. I can't believe this.
Time flies when we're having fun.
Holy cow. We're gonna have to end it at this, and pick it up here next week, but, let's just finish this. If Brandon would finish reading the comment where it says, we must ask the question.
We must ask the question, what is the nature of covenant? I would suggest that covenant is best understood as an arrangement initiated by God in which he makes certain promises to man and expects certain things from man in return.
Right.
If we examine the covenant God made with Abraham, God made promises first to Abraham, next to Abraham's family, and finally to all mankind. But the blessings of all these promises are contingent on Abraham's faithfulness to God in obeying God's commands. Abraham agrees to God's call, and he goes to the land that God shows him. The whole plan, at least with Abraham, falls apart if he does not go where God shows him. In fact, the plan begins to unravel when Abraham fails to stay in the land during a famine and instead goes to Egypt. God, of course, in faithfulness to his promise, rescues Sarah and Abraham, and the plan goes on. But we find throughout the life of Abraham that it is his obedience to the covenant that results in his blessing and the opportunity for faithfulness on the part of others, that is, his descendants, the nations, and others. As the ultimate act of obedience, Abraham, in compliance with God's command, offers up his son Isaac. As a result, God rewards his faithfulness. Quote, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand and the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Genesis 22:11.
Yeah.
Due then to Abraham's faithfulness, God established his covenant with Abraham and his descendants after him. The covenant exists regardless of the descendants due to Abraham's faithfulness. The blessings of that relationship, however, are contingent on the obedience of subsequent generations. There is nothing that the children of Israel can do to undo the covenant, but their obedience will determine the extent to which they are blessed.
Yeah. I want to establish this reality right now, that God's faithfulness to Israel is not contingent on Israel's faithfulness to God. If that were true, we'd be dead already. We would have died along with the Canaanites. So let's understand this is why, going back to what it says in verses 16 and 17, that the gospel is the righteousness of God from faith to faith, that it is God's righteous acts, God's righteousness, if you will, is fulfilling his promises that makes all my faith possible.
Right.
It's not that I, all of a sudden, out of the clear blue sky, invent God or anything like that. So we understand what covenant is all about, just as we begin, all right?
Yes.
Listen, we're gonna have to stop because it's already almost
Thank you.
4 o'clock. And I'm supposed to stop at 3:30. So I want to thank you all. I hope you'll all continue to join us because you're really making this more exciting for me. And we'll pick it up at verse what is it, 18, when Paul, I don't know, goes off on the human condition next week. Can we have a word of prayer? Just have a word of prayer before we close. So, Lord our God, I just want to thank you for this Shabbat. It was a beautiful service today. And I just pray that as we have opened our study on the book of Romans, which is so difficult to understand, and many people have attempted to fully understand the meaning of what Paul wrote, that you will open our hearts and our minds to really understand your word and to have the ability to apply it to our own condition today. And it's not just a message for those people who lived back then, but there are many ideas contained in this that apply to our need to know.
Yes.
So help us, we pray. And I pray for a good week for all.
Amen.
May God bless you. Shavua Tov. Amen.
Amen.